we're going to see Minigun and Crank, the conclusion. Here he is. Top right-hand position, Axiom Crank on Derelict Watcher as the blue Protoss. The bottom left-hand position as the red Protoss, it's going to be Minigun.
And I think as Crank, the way I'd want to play this game is I just want to play passive. I'd want to make sure I don't get behind, and I want to aim for the late game. Because I think the way we've seen Minigun playing the last 2 games is more mid-game focused. He gets that Colossi army out in the previous 2 games, and that's an army that doesn't do so well once the late game death ball is actually completed.
Yeah, and we've seen not only that, he plays for the mid-game, he plays for that Colossus composition, and he doesn't pull the trigger nearly as much. Nearly as much as he should. He definitely could have, game number 1 on Whirlwind, pushed in and went for the base trade, right? But Minigun plays a style where he wants to be very comfortable and secure and keep up the pressure, you know, and play it where it's not so chaotic and archaic. And I feel like Crank can utilize that to say, okay, I can go up to 180 supply, shark around the map, and I don't actually have to hit my supply cap. I can go over to Tempest, knowing that Minigun will never push into me. I can keep Zealot harassing and Dark Templar harassing until I have the perfect composition against Colossus. And of course, I'm assuming Colossus are out, but it's something to note with Minigun. He doesn't like to pull that trigger nearly as much with his large armies. He doesn't like just engage into the sake of engagements unless he knows for sure that he is killing something.
Yeah, like you, I'm kind of hoping we see that Stargate tech again from Minigun. Crank did not handle that very well last game. And Stargate, it's not really a cheesy play in PvP. We see some Protosses in other regions, like in Europe, we see Duck play Stargate almost about 50-60% of the time in PvP. I think Minigun can probably do that, possibly do that again, and I think it'd be a good choice if he did.
Yeah. I really feel like Stargate play is the best opening that you can do in the beginning phases. Yes, it has a couple of hard counters, but still, it just has so much utility.
Yeah, if you deny scouting, then the hard counters, it's a gamble from the other player.
Exactly.
So,
and it's not only a gamble of what I do after that, but what units I make inside of my Stargate, because a lot of these Stalker all-ins, 3-gate pressure that you can do. If a Void Ray, and I know that sounds crazy, but if a Void Ray is the first unit out of my Stargate, it's going to shut down your 3-gate really easily because I just throw down another Photon Overcharge, Chrono Boost out another Void Ray. I have 2 Void Rays against your, what, like 7, 8 Stalkers? That sounds good on paper, but when I have my own Stalkers and Sentries behind that, that becomes unmanageable, and you can never, ever, ever put pressure on that. All of a sudden, I have Void Rays, you have Stalkers. That's the difference in gas investment. I have all this extra minerals that I can put to a faster third base, or even get a much, much nicer army.
and we see a fast Twilight Council as the choice for Crank. I think that'll be for DTs again, even though he could do Blink possibly, but I think DTs is the choice he's more likely to be doing. And
That's so
Stargate
sick.
coming down from Minigun.
Yeah, think about that too. It's like, well, Crank says, well, I did well with Dark Templars, might as well go them. And then Minigun says, well, game 2, I did so well with Stargate, I might as well go that. So both these players going, I would say, their forte. Let's see how it actually works out. Again, once you get the Stargate, you absolutely have to get the Oracle first to defend against Dark Templars.
So this is kind of an interesting combination of builds for each player to be doing. Stargate it plays out a few different ways against DTs depending on expansion times and such for both players. But I think it kind of might favor the Stargate player at first, and then it kind of goes back and forth at different points of the game depending on how the players do. I don't know, what do you think about it?
I do think this is the best possible situation for Crank to be in, because now the defense, you don't go Blink Stalkers, you go High Templars. That sounds really weird, but feedback, and then you're double feedbacking and then making Archons each time they poke in.
Still, you can't do that until he has a second base. You're not going to go High Templars from one base.
True.
So.
But you plug 3 Stalkers inside each base, you're set. You're not worried about any all-ins, because all you have to do is scout the natural to make sure there's no expansion there. Once you see that, you're saying, okay, they are or aren't doing a Stargate all-in, let's position my units accordingly. If it is an all-in, you shove all your probes into your natural, or most of your probes into your natural, and you just you hardcore defend the natural.
Crank kind of unfortunately makes the Nexus right before the Stalkers walk up the ramp. Just a good timing from Minigun though. And I think this is good. I like it from Minigun.
Well, the Oracle's getting in here, and it's already pretty low in health. I think it's just trying to bait
It's used the Dark
the
Shrine
Photon
now.
Overcharge.
Second Oracle is out of Minigun's base for the defense.
Yep.
A couple Stalkers out too. Think he should be able to shut down
Okay.
the DT.
Yes, he will.
Shouldn't get any kills. He might. I think he should be able to kill that pretty easily if he just follows it with the Stalkers. Stalkers move faster than Dark Templar.
Yeah.
And that Revelation lasts quite a while.
Not
so
for long, though, once they get the stim upgrade. Permanent stim upgrade.
if they get the stim upgrade. So I think I like Minigun's position kind of here. Do you think he's just making the Warp Prism because he assumes the Minigun won't make Phoenixes? Because if there's Phoenixes made, obviously the Warp Prism is useless.
I'm not sure, honestly. I feel like this Warp Prism is really severely out of place, but I think at the same time he's thinking, well, I need to micro a little bit because...
I'd like it more if he got it after he made his Nexus, though.
Yes, I agree.
Because, I mean, if Minigun sees us on a 1 base, all Minigun's going to do is play defensively, and then he just gets a bit farther behind.
He just says, okay, I'm going to wait until you attack, put my Photon Overcharge on, then we're going to have our big engagement. I'm going to be able to materialize off my expansion. You won't be able to do that. And then I just snowball out of control. We'll see. I feel like Minigun is in the perfect position to go into the winner's bracket, though.
Yeah, he is. His Nexus is way before Crank's Nexus. And Crank, we see now he's about to start a Nexus, but this is just so much later. Minigun's Nexus is almost done.
Yep.
And like last game, we saw when Minigun gets an advantage, he knows how to use it. So if he can get the same lead, I think he'll be in a perfect position to take this game.
There was no Mothership core that was made. That's going to weaken his defense a little bit here.
Yeah, but
I guess that doesn't really mean anything.
If Crank's not going for a timing,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter if you have a weaker defense.
Well, the Warp Prism is getting in here, and the same type of harass is being done. There is a probe that's still in the natural of Minigun's base, by the way. I've been watching him the whole time. He hasn't done anything, but he can't do anything at the same time. And here it comes. The Dark Templar is going to be spotted momentarily. Where's the reaction? There it is.
I don't know about going for this pylon. I think that's kind of a silly choice. If you're going to go for a Warp Prism like this to harass,
Well, what else can you really go for, though?
could have maybe got a probe or two kill. A
But
couple probe kills.
Aren't you... I guess he's thinking, well, I can go for that. It's a little bit risky because there can be stalkers and observers or stalkers and oracles over there.
I
And
mean-
then I'm giving up my Dark Templar
Yeah,
for a probe.
I understand that, but if you're going to invest in this early Warp Prism before the
Yeah,
Nexus,
that's
it's just
true.
kind of strange. I feel like you'd want to do
You
more
have
with
to.
it.
You have to do damage, right?
Because
Yeah,
killing
you're
a
absolutely
pylon,
right.
that's not paying off for this quick investment and the delayed Nexus that he had.
But what about 2 pylons, Mike?
I don't think so. When you can get a nice worker lead,
Yeah.
then
No, I
Actually-
completely agree.
Minigun is at a worker deficit right now. I'm not sure how that happened. Maybe he doesn't make
He hates
probes as much
probes, man.
as he should.
He hates probes. I mean, we've seen that. Crank loves to oversaturate his base. He was actually at 26 probes out of 16, which is obviously more than you need. But still, Minigun, I mean, he's been yielding off of fresher mineral patches. On top of that, he's not oversaturated on a single base, so he definitely mines a little bit more. But Harvester lead is going to Minigun right now, so things stabilize. Wow, that's really surprising. I'm really shocked. Yes, Crank is behind in 10 supply, but
I think it was just a probe production issue for Minigun. I think if
Wow.
he'd been making his probes constantly, he would have had maybe an 8 or 10 probe lead by now.
I think so. And look, he's even supply capped, but it's going to be lifted pretty soon here. Things are looking still pretty good, I would say, overall for Minigun.
I'd agree. He has a slight army advantage.
I'm not a big fan of this Colossus, Mike. Every time I see Colossus in PvP, I know Max said, actually that makes so much sense. The Chinese scene uses it. And Minigun,
Just copies the Chinese players.
he doesn't copy them. He kind of incorporates the styles, but you know, last time he was here, I was like, hey, why do you do this? Why do you do that? Why do you do this? And he's like, because Jim does it. I was like, oh, well.
Well, if Jim does it, then maybe it'll work.
Yeah. Well, it is perfect logic. I mean, ask Mr. Bitter. Ask Rotterdam.
This game will be kind of the proof of his build. We'll see whether or not it works pretty
Yes.
well. Because they're both entering the mid game at basically an even position. So if it looks like it can't work in this position, then I mean, I don't know why you do it.
Yeah. I do want to say, though, that Jim does switch it up as well. He does do Immortal Archon a lot of times. He does do a lot of pressure builds like that. I think Max said is the one that does more Colossus builds more than anybody else. We'll see how it works out. It could just be that this is his stylistic thing. And it definitely has its capabilities, right? Like, the AoE, you cannot deny how strong Colossus AoE is. It's definitely always going to be one thing that you have to be so worried about. And we saw in last game, a Colossus army just absolutely shreds through Zealot, Archon, Immortal,
Yeah, well,
if there's no good positioning.
Yeah, that was a much better situation for Minigun, though. Although, I mean, this isn't a bad situation. It's even. But last game, he just had such a huge advantage. And on Akalon, it's more of a choked-up map when he attacks, so it's a bit easier to do that.
A little bit dicey here. as the High Templar almost got a feedback in one of those oracles. That would have been game over oracle, as it has 175 mana. Nothing too crazy though. +2 is about to finish out here for Crank, so he will have that momentary, not momentary, but quite a long timing where he can obviously have the advantage in upgrades. But he just doesn't have the material to do anything with it. And it looks like Minigun has already started switching over units. 61 Harvesters to 52. Now all of a sudden Minigun has switched over and become that probe machine.
I think we might see a timing attack coming out from Minigun this game. And
I hope
think,
so.
Yeah, I think we will, because he's adding additional gateways now. And I think if he was planning on a more passive game, well, I mean, he'd still have to add gateways. Well, I guess we'll have to see how many he adds.
Yeah, this feels like it's going to be that +2 timing attack.
Oracle is flying in, getting feedback, like you said. Neither of them died, though, so that's pretty good. That he saved them, at least. They can still harass later.
But
7 gates in production.
So, Mike, what is the angle that Minigun should take as he moves up into his opponent's base?
I think he wants to try to kind of hug the wall.
Over here?
By the third base. I think that's the angle.
Yeah.
It partially depends on the army positioning he sees from Crank when he goes in. He should have a good idea of it, because he has pretty good scouting with the oracles, and he should be able to poke forward with those when he moves in for the push.
I will say that Crank's Zealot count is really, really low at this point. Of course, Zealots are easier to spam out as soon as the army walks across the field.
I don't think that's a big deal. He should start powering up in the Zealots once these additional 4 gateways are done. But Minigun's moving out now. This could be the perfect timing. Crank is just now adding his additional gates. Like you said, his Zealot count's pretty low, and that's what you need to buffer for these Immortals. He doesn't have that many Archons now, so most of Crank's buffer is going to be relying on Zealots.
And Minigun's doing the right approach. Going over this way would put him in a potentially a 360-degree arc. So he is just hugging this wall and making sure that he's super, super close now. Adding in a couple of Archons, perfect decision. He's just going to constantly put in Archons and Zealots, Archons and Zealots. And that makes so much sense because he's just buffering the amount of hit points between the opponent's army and the Colossus. And now he's going to be hugging over. Perfect, to the third base.
Yeah, it's still going to be kind of tough, though, if Crank moves his army in the right position.
Yeah.
Crank's army is pretty strong. I think this will come down to the time warps and the angles of engagement.
Well, warp prisms are going to warp in a couple of Zealots over here. +3 will finish for Crank in a little bit. He could have actually targeted down this pylon. Actually,
Minigun moving forward pretty aggressively with his units here.
And Time Warp needs to be placed down for Minigun. It looks like he will get them perfect, and now he can start cutting all these units. But he's going to back up.
Damage already, though.
Yeah, he's going to back up. The Archons are getting some pretty heavy shots, though. And I felt like that was the perfect position, but now engaging into Time Warps, that's a great fire for Minigun. He's cleaning up the Archons really fast, warping in additional units. The warp-ins from Crank are so far away, now backing up because the Zealots are coming in for the right flank. And it looks like Minigun may be able to be still pretty cost-efficient in this fight, but the Colossus are getting exposed. He needs to micro this correctly. Bring the Colossus onto the high ground. Chase is being given. There are so many Immortals in this composition, and Minigun is going to be forced back in this fight. Wow, that was so back and forth. I still feel like Minigun did get a pretty good engagement overall, but it just was not enough.
Well, Minigun's not out of it yet, though. The supply is still pretty close, and Minigun is the 4th base going down. So he isn't completely dead.
No. He's not completely dead by any means. But I mean, he still needs to keep cutting this.
That army from Crank is so scary, though. He has 8 Immortals. I think it's going to be tough for Minigun to hold this off.
Yep, and he's going to be backed all the way into the natural base. No Time Warps anymore, but a Time Warp will be up for, or a Recall, excuse me, will be up for Crank. He's going to poke out a little bit here. There's that beautiful Time Warp that we're talking about, and now going to be attacking in. And this is a difficult position for a Minigun to be in because he wants to defend his third base, but if he pushes out into a Time Warp, and that's where there could be a huge jump. And look, the Immortal count is still very healthy. All that Crank needs to do is warp in additional Zealots and Archons, and he's in a great position. But consistently kiting, I like what we're seeing. Archons joining up in the battle.
I think Crank's army is just a lot better than Minigun's right now. He has a lot of Archons, a lot of Immortals.
Especially given the position. And the third base is still being ravaged, by the way, Mike.
Yeah.
This is just beautiful for Minigun.
I don't know how Minigun can engage this.
He can't. I mean, he needs the Mother support. He needs Time Warp. That's the big timing that you have to use. You're looking to have 2 Time Warps to kite as many units as possible and just have that overwhelming advantage in numbers and in units when the battle is ended. But because he doesn't have that, I mean, you can't snowball in this phase of the game.
Yeah, and I think this game is going to end pretty soon. I don't see how Minigun can defend against this many units.
Yeah,
the Archons, there's so many of them, they're just melting all of his Zealots.
And even the spacing, look, he's pushing up with the Immortals, forcing the Colossus back or getting shredded immediately. Additional Warpins coming here, Probes getting pulled off the line, but the Archons are still alive doing damage. GG comes out, and Crank will move on into the winners.